Welcome. It's Monday, which means it's time for Composition 2 for Section 3003. As always, am Mr. Fowler. I'm so happy that you're here to join us today. Let's go ahead and jump right into things so that you can see what it is we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share this page and jump over here to our Fall Composition 2 Desire to Learn homepage. So for today, session number 5, we're going to go over and preview this agenda, and then I will have some brief points of review to cover. So today is the focus on visual arguments. That's chapter 3 in your textbook, and we're going to talk specifically about how to think critically and use active reading strategies, topics we've already covered before, but we're going to specifically discuss how we can apply those strategies to the analysis of a specific image or series of images. We're also going to talk about how to highlight and annotate visuals. We've discussed highlighting and annotating before, but how do we do that in a visual context? We'll find out today. And then how do we prepare a critical response for a visual analysis like the ad analysis project coming up next week? We'll conclude by discussing the checklist on pages 494 and 95 of your textbook, just briefly, as perhaps a springboard that you could use to respond to the discussion questions for this week. And then we will host a Q&A time where we'll talk about this assignment, perhaps other concerns that students have for discussion questions, or anything and everything that you can imagine. So if we do all of those things in good time, we should probably take up our allotted space. But if we do have extra time at the end of today's session, you may want to go ahead and respond to the weekly discussion thread if you already have an idea about your focal point for the ad analysis project. Now, for next time, be sure that if you have not yet done so, you're making arrangements to obtain a copy of The Princess Bride sometime before September 15th. If you have it by that date, you should be fine for when we jump into that text. Okay, so let's briefly review a couple of key points from last week, session 4. We talked a lot about what it means to read and think critically. And we said that most of the time we need to be aware of our own initial bias, which means that unlike the standard approach of creating logical, evidence-based responses to a question or concern, we allow our emotional feelings to drive our argument. Now, that's not to say that you cannot be passionate about an argument. In point of fact, I've often suggested to students, arguments that you feel passionately about are good topics, and I don't dissuade anybody from approaching those. But you have to be careful when you are writing or responding to an argument about what you feel passionately. You have to give yourself enough time and space to dispassionately look at the evidence available and make a nice evaluation based on the information that you're able to bring to bear. Along with being aware of your bias when it comes to a particular topic, you also have to pause long enough to consider opposing arguments. This is the power, as we discussed last week in our thread, of the refutation. How could you effectively refute something, or have you ever had your perspective effectively refuted? We had some really interesting threads going on in there last week. And of course, should you find good evidence, make sure that you're willing to evaluate it dispassionately and assess its accuracy before you include it in your rebuttal or in your general argument. Now, when you're talking about source material specifically, we said that it's important, therefore, to read actively, which means you should not only preview a given text, but you should then read it and then go back a third time to highlight or annotate it. Highlighting meaning that you would focus on the most important details of that text, and annotating meaning that you would ask questions of the reading as you are thinking critically about it, and perhaps even respond to some of those questions posted by the authors of the text themselves. We also said that there are a couple of stop gaps that you need to make sure, a checklist, if you will, that you should think about whenever you are designing a critical response. And they're as follows. You should identify the source and its author, because anytime you enter into an argument, it's important to make sure that your audience is grounded enough to understand what it is you're discussing in the first place. You should summarize the position of the opposing argument or the author with whom you are agreeing with this, with whose perspective you're agreeing. You should then analyze one by one their supporting points. These will oftentimes formulate or take up the body of a longer written essay. So for a critical response, each of the supporting points probably would equate to about one body or 1.5 perhaps body paragraphs. Try to remember that when you're talking about a large scale argument, that you focus on your key points. Otherwise, you could find yourself drifting into territory that will distract your reader. And, you know, ask yourself, what in an argument that you're opposing is poorly constructed? What is irrelevant? And what's just downright unconvincing? Those are the points that you should identify and then rigorously attack once you begin the writing process. Okay, that is a little bit of a review before we get into visual arguments. Any questions about visual arguments, or sorry, any questions about review topics before we get into visuals? Anything?
No, let's continue. Hello?
I didn't quite hear that.
No? So, no, let's continue.
You can also type it into the chat if you've said something I'm not hearing you. All right. I'm going to start rolling ahead here. So, chapter 3. This is where we get into the decoding of visual arguments. And a lot of you have had some questions about this specific assignment. And you've raised some concerns about how do you decode a visual argument. Well, if you've got your text out available, I will first refer you to, I want to give you the whole right page, hold on. Oh, 92. So if you have your text, go ahead and look up page 92. And this is a pretty simple ad. This is a print ad that appeared in video game magazines and online for a video game called Grand Theft Auto 4. I'll show you here. So this is just the visual element of Grand Theft Auto 4, this advertisement. And the authors of the text have been good enough to sort of break down some of the visual designs of this argument. a couple of things too that I'm going to get back to. I'm just going to drop the mention here and then circle back. Don't forget that you have a complete version on Desire to Learn of a student who's completed this project, moving from the rough draft to the peer review to the final copy. So if you haven't yet had a chance to check that or you missed it, that is still available in Desire to Learn. But for right now, if you're looking at that ad, Grand Theft Auto 4, pretty popular game, but also fairly well known for the wrong reasons, perhaps. The whole series of video games, for example, has been in the crosshairs of many organizations because of its violence, because of its depictions of crime, and because of platitudes that have been heaped upon this series despite some of this negative attention. Lots of attention given to it for its writing, for the acting of the characters who are portraying the characters, its motion capture technology, and for the narrative that specifically this game spins about the American experience, as the protagonist is an immigrant from Eastern Europe, sort of experiencing all of the heightened versions of American society as depicted in the game. So if we look at the breakdown, and again, this is on page 92 of your text, they start with just exploring the visual dynamics. They look at the background, the foreground, and some of the script. There's not much written information here to analyze. But even though it's just the game title Grand Theft Auto 4, they write a note that says that the text is the name of the game itself, and it's in large type with a very striking black and white contrasting background that brings a level of emphasis to the text. Beyond that, in the foreground, they say that there is a dark image of the central protagonist, and he is framed against the backdrop of what's called Liberty City, it's a stand-in for our real world New York. The background itself is kind of hazy and lighter, which suggests the city itself may be targeted to some extent by this ominous character, or depending on for those of you who've played through this game, the scenarios present you with very a wide variety of potential actions that you can take, not all of which have to be negative. I played through and I found that most of the time my decisions were more benign, but that's just based on who you are as a person, as a player at that time playing that game. They point out that there is an image of what looks to be the and then the buildings fail. The name is escaping me right now. I got it back. The Empire State Building, and they said that that's famously used to be one of the tallest buildings in the world. It used to be the tallest building in New York, and that the gun perched on his shoulder is taller than the tallest spire of the building. Compared to the city and its framing, he looks rather large and ominous. The skyline, again, mimicking that of New York City, but also specifically with a hazy yellow sky, indicating that this is the 21st century amidst the pollution and debris that perforates the skyline of most major cities in the United States today. Again, if you were to glance at this as an advertisement, you might not go into such deep details You might not focus on all of those elements individually. You might glance at the entire piece and sort of come away with it or come away from it and say, okay, well, that's looks like an interesting video game. Or I'm familiar with this series and I'm eager to see what new elements they're going to bring to the story. But when you break down all of the constituent elements in the image, using your critical thinking skills, you can see that there's quite a bit more going on than just the image as one whole block. All of its constituent pieces work to sell an idea or sell the product, in this case, the game. All right. I've been talking for an entirely too long of a period of time. Okay. Now I'm going to transition. I'm going to show you one more visual from your textbooks. So if you have your textbooks and you want to pull this out, this is fine. But if you don't, I'm going to share it with you. And it's on the very next page, so page 93. And this time I'm going to have you analyze the various elements that are extant in the example. So again, this is just from the next page, page 93 of your textbooks.
First off,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of weaponry.
Absolutely. And I'm going to just zoom this back in for a second. In the upper right-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, rather, there's some text that says, media MV, media violence will affect your children. And I'm going to see how close I can get that without it blurring. Yeah, media violence, I think. Okay, yeah, there we go. That's about as close as I can get it without the text blurring on the camera. And I'm just gonna, sorry if I pulled away too quickly, I was just gonna read it. It says that, wow, that is really small.
I can try.
Yeah.
The American Academy of
Pediatrics,
Pediatric of Violence in Media, including television, commercial, or self-reported video, movies, video games, print, radio, etc., and so forth, yada yada yada,
Mm-hmm.
as a significant risk of to the health of children and adolescents. American children between 2 and 18 years of age spend an average of 6 hours and 32 minutes each day using this media. Extensive research and evidence indicates that media violence continue to contribute to aggressive behavior,
Nightmares.
Aggressive behavior.
Aggressive behavior.
I don't know what that word says. Something to violence, nightmares, and fear of being harmed.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's a pretty good reading. Thank you so much, Devin. Yeah, that was excellent. So you've got this image. First of all, what's the most striking thing? I think you already started us off on the right foot here, Devin. That you said that's a lot of hardware being directed at that kid. Or maybe use the word weaponry. I can't remember right this moment, but I think it was something.
Yes, weaponry.
A lot of weaponry here. What else? And I think that's the first thing I noticed too when I look at it. What else do you notice about the image?
Well, it shows a baby, which means it doesn't have to be a teenager or older person. It starts when they're young, but all the destruction.
Absolutely. It's not a teenager. It's not the kind of or even an adolescent or adult. not the sort of person that we typically associate with the negative impacts of violence in the media. As you said very astutely there, Sonia, it can start very gradually, you know, when you're a young child. I've recently seen, and this is probably a quick aside, but on Facebook, I've seen visual arguments as of late, and I see them. I've seen them for the past 3 or 4 years now. Every time school starts, and they're targeted toward the parents of young girls in school, and they always suggest something akin to, make sure that your daughter understands that young boys who hit them or who strike them physically to gain their attention, make sure that they understand that that's not cute. Don't tell them that don't be dismissive and say they're flirting with you, things like that, because that can acclimate. There is some research to suggest that these ideas, which once at least were very typical in American society, that they may acclimate young women to a standard of violent treatment. They may get used to the idea that that's acceptable behavior. And these little ads that come out on Facebook right around this time each year advocate for parents that, that's not okay. Don't tell your daughters that that's okay. So I think that's an interesting element that sort of rings true, is that they're in relation to this ad on page 95 or 90, excuse me, on page 93, which simply suggests that oftentimes we have a boiled frog effect that goes on in society. I just realized that may not be an accessible metaphor for everybody. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I reference the boiled frog effect?
I
No.
do.
Can you explain in your own words real quickly for us, Sonia, what does a boiled frog effect refer to?
I said, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Sorry. But somebody said they did know that?
No.
Okay. So real quickly,
I'm gonna do a quick Google search. Is
the boiled frog effect.
that fine?
Yeah, that's fine. But we'll see what the Google search says compared to my analysis. But the boiled frog effect is just a reference, a metaphor that has been noticed, which is that if you take a frog and put it in a pot of cold or even lukewarm water, they'll be relatively comfortable. But as you slowly increase the amount of heat within the pan of water or the pot of water, the frog will acclimate to the heat. It will relax, not understanding that it's in potential danger of being boiled. So I think in many respects, this image of silence the violence from page 93 of our text is alluding to what Sonia suggested. There is an effect that's more gradual that can start when you're very young, just like the acclimation to boys being violent toward girls. And if you acclimate enough slowly from a younger age, the long-term effects can be potentially devastating. Devin, was I right? Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
I just posted an image of what you were talking about.
Okay. But was it a humorous, or was it?
It was a comic.
Oh,
it was
comic.
Humorous. Yeah,
Okay,
it was a
good.
humorous one.
So if you go, if the rest of you want to research that, you'll probably be relatively safe. That's what I wanted to make sure of. All right. What else is of merit? What else is interesting about this piece, Silence the Violence? What else do you notice beyond the weaponry?
The child is pretty much all blank. I mean, it can be from it can't just happen to anyone.
Right. It could be anybody that could be slotted in there. I guess you could also say that the child, he or she, we can't determine the gender, but he or she could be a blank canvas on which its personality is yet to be written.
Yes, there we go.
And one of the things they also use with the child and the television, this is an old television set, nothing new or modern. So this isn't something new in the game where you see videos more popular than you would back in the day of 1960 or 70 with the old television. This has been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, good point. This is a long-term effect, and I think that's a good thing to point out, because that's an element of this text that speaks to a specific demographic, somebody who's going to recognize that model of television as a model that was either contemporary when they were younger, or that they can still see as a TV, that they can still make connections to as a television. Excellent point. Good.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah, please.
Y'all know how the old Tom and Jerry shows were like compared to the new ones?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Just throwing that out there.
Right. Tom and Jerry, cartoons in general are good ways to think about how much society has changed. I was just talking to my parents about this the other day. Did you all know that there is a Tom and Jerry cartoon that was banned? It used to be shown in the theaters before films, but it was banned because it was an episode that depicted Tom the cat believing that he had actually killed Jerry the mouse, and he became so depressed over the fact
I think I saw that
he had maybe killed Jerry, that he goes down to a train track and puts his head on the train tracks.
I saw that.
Contemplating suicide. Mm-hmm. It's a very controversial today, but this was humor. This was played up for humor. And of course, luckily the resolution to the cartoon is that Jerry the mouse is like, he's been taunting Tom and making him think he's a ghost and stuff like that. And he's alarmed, and he goes and he tells Tom that he's alive, and he saves him from killing himself. But just the act itself, that he would even contemplate that, got it on the list of banned cartoons. So they can no longer air it. It's available, I think, in certain collections, like premium collections of that series, but you don't see it aired on television anymore. That's another good example of it's a type of specific violence that filters down through to younger viewers. Absolutely, that's a great topic to kind of coalesce into this discussion. Any other visual elements from this depiction that you find interesting?
I was going to say the weaponry
Mm-hmm.
is like all different types. You have like a shuriken, I think, a missile, a bow and arrow. So it shows like you can find violence in really like any type of media, no matter like what it is.
Yeah, and they made sure to include a fist. I think a lot of times.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, black and white westerns, I think most of the time we consider those fairly benign. No one ever bleeds. If they do die from a gunshot wound, we don't see the effects. But no one really thinks twice about the violence of just a simple punch or a fist fight. That's exciting, as part of the most narratives. However, it's one of this is the most ancient weapon. Go ahead.
I said, hey, WWE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. These are all sorts of things that are with us, even though that WWE is another good example. That's stylized violence. But going back to what Nick said, every conceivable weapon, from shurikens to Eastern weapons. There's even a nuclear warhead being launched off here. I can see.
Nice.
And bombs, all sorts of guns. Yeah, all of these things are often shown to children or depicted, and they witnessed something like 73 hours of violence before they turned 3 years old or something like that collectively. I mean, that's tough. But let's pause for a moment. We haven't yet addressed the text. Let's look at the primary text in the foreground. It reads, "Silence the violence." So this is a pretty quick analysis. What's the objective of the ad?
Tame the showing of guns and grenades and stuff like that. It's like Tom and Jerry, like they just significantly dropped the use of weapons and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This.
Yeah. And
this.
Yeah. Now, all of you, I got to be careful here. I would guess that a lot of you came of age just after Batman, the animated series, or at least you probably have some passing familiarity with it. Anybody remember Batman, the cartoon, the animated series? Used to air on Fox.
Kids WB.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a little bit darker of a show than like the other ones, I felt like.
Right. It was originally planned to be shown in the evenings. And the reason they had to do that was because they used a lot of gun violence or action in the background of those stories. And it was only a change in policies ushered in by the Clinton administration in the early 90s that allowed for the flexibility of that series to be shown later in the daytime schedule. The FCC backed off of some of their very rigid controls. And you can see this in as much as if you've ever seen a cartoon series from the 80s, something like Masters of the Universe, for example, or She-Ra, they're action-oriented cartoons, but He-Man, the character, was never allowed to be depicted as killing anybody. He could smash a robot that was a non-living entity because, first of all, robots didn't exist to that extent at that time, and two, because it was a non-living creature. But he could never dispatch a villain. Even though his primary weapon of choice was a sword, that made it very difficult for him to have some action-oriented combat. He was often seen cutting something or bouncing a ray gun or other off of his sword. Another famous example was G.I. Joe in the 1980s. These are military soldiers, but they fight with futuristic laser-based weapons. The reason being that the very first pilot episode was shown depicting actual machine guns with bullets. And they had to go back and redo that and trace them over with laser blasts because they said, you can't show that on television. It's not appropriate for young viewers. So even in, from the 1980s to the 1990s, the FCC has switched dramatically. And now, of course, the FCC is fairly, I don't know, their hands are essentially tied by the fact that most major networks that target young children, like Disney or Cartoon Network, they're cable channels. So they're not under the purview of the FCC's public policies. They can do what they want because they're a privatized company. We've already taken a look at some of the other text, the media violence, and we've read, of course, thanks to Devin reading in there, that this comes to us from the Institute for Media Studies. And so we have that text in hand as well. So even a very simple image like this one can be assessed. And I don't know how much time we spent talking about it. Oh, I don't know, like 15 minutes probably. So even in 15 minutes, we've done more analysis on this basic image from page 93 than you probably would have, even if you had read through and annotated the entire chapter. It's pretty effective in terms of looking at how to respond to visual arguments. I'm going to share one more document with you, okay, just as a kind of a review. So hold on while I switch to share screen. Oh, try that again. Share. There we go. I'm going to make this a little larger for us. Okay. So again, the ad analysis or the analysis writing assignment asks you to critically review a print or other media advertisement in order to examine its rhetorical elements. You'll compose an essay that describes the ad in question, and then you will go a second step, explaining your understanding of the ad and its message, what audience it was designed for, what you think the context of the design means, and then once those elements have been identified, you'll comment on the visual content related to the advertisement. And lastly, you'll have a little bit of personal response time for this essay, in which you explore how effective or ineffective you personally believe the relative strength of the advertisement is. So again, if we count them down, describe the ad, okay? What is your understanding of the ad and its message? What is its audience? What is the context? What are the visual elements, number 5? And number 6, how effective or ineffective is it? Again, this is available for you on Desire Learn if you want to go back and reread that more thoroughly. But those 6 constituent elements, I think, should get you to about 600 words. That's a little bit more than 2 full pages, if memory serves.
How many pages?
I think it's a little bit more than 2.
I thought this was a 4-page.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, 500 words. Did I? I believe you. Hold on. Maybe I missed. Yeah. I said it's about 2.5. And the student example that I showed you is a little bit more than 600 words. So 500 words is about 2 pages, 2 full pages. So 600 words would probably be in the ballpark of 2.5 to maybe even 3 pages. But I'm guessing it's closer to 2.5, 600 words precisely.
And this is a little bit going into the future, but how many papers do we have in this class? Is it just 3?
3 papers. Now, quick point of review here. This paper that we're talking about, the ad analysis, you have to do a draft. You have to revise that draft. After that paper, the other 2 projects, you don't have to revise. But the final paper or the final project in lieu of a final exam is a revised version of one of the other 2 papers. So you will choose which one you want to revise.
Okay.
That's a great question, Kevin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was in one of the syllabus or one of the initial postings. I thought I read that it was a 4-page paper, a 5-page paper, and a 6-page paper. And so I was thinking that the first paper we're doing was 4 pages, but I guess I misread.
Yeah, that's okay. I probably meant that, and here's my way of thinking. This is kind of odd. So you'll write the paper. Let's say it was 2.5 pages. And then you write the revision, and you may or may not add to that. You then be probably approaching something around 4. So I'm kind of doubling a couple of those numbers because there's a draft and a revision. So I kind of get to do that for my department said, okay, if there is a serious revision, will sometimes result in an added material. Can we double that practice number? And they said we could for revisions. So I guess I was probably counting the initial draft and the revision as the 4. Great question. Any other initial questions? Okay, I'm going to share screen real quickly, and then I'm just going to have Q&A for the rest of the session. So let me share this with you. There I am. Okay, so for this week, our discussion question, it's pretty basic, but if you want to ask questions or you have concerns and you're not comfortable voicing them in our discussion forum, you're going to get another opportunity this week. So here we go, weekly discussion number 3. I'm just going to have you free write for 15 minutes this week and reflect on these questions. What topic or what example are you thinking about for the ad analysis project? You don't have to have the final answer right now ready this week, but it's going to push you a little bit to start thinking about what kind of project you want to focus on. What do you still need more information about regarding this project? And what concerns do you have about how it's going to be evaluated? So anything that you want and everything that you can think of that you could ask about that topic is up for discussion this week. So do not hesitate to take advantage of that piece of writing. Okay. Anything else? So this is just your time. We've discussed a little bit about these sorts of things. And now I'm kind of open for you.
I think I'm good for the day. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
You go ahead. I saw you up there.
Yeah, if you want, the rest of the time is yours. You can respond to that discussion question, if nothing else. That's fine. Any other questions or concerns?
I probably will talk with you after class.
That's
If
okay.
you don't mind.
Then that's fine. And then if there aren't other questions, I just wanted to point out one last thing. I know I said a last thing before, but I forgot. Sorry. The checklist in your text on pages 94 to 95. If you come away with this and you're like, okay, Mr. Fowler walked us through a couple of examples, but I still just don't know what to do. The checklist in your textbook on pages 94 and 95, questions for responding to visual arguments, are really good questions. So if you are preparing an outline this week in anticipation for next week's writing lab, you might think, all right, I'm going to use this checklist as a way to set up my paper. Each of these points are going to be ideas that I address as I design the outline for what my ad analysis is going to look like. And they're there for you. You can read them. I'm not going to go through and read them for you because you can do that. But you could do much worse than simply using that checklist as a guidepost to design a good outline for the writing of an essay. And I'm an outline advocate. I don't assign outlines as mandatory because certain students don't like to do them. They like to write more off the cuff. I used to write off of the cuff, and I would only have real basic thumbnail sketch outline, maybe something that said introduction, body, conclusion. And I just had ideas and notes about things I wanted to bring up. And I was never asked to create an outline or turn one in for a project when I was in school. I have assigned them in the past on occasion, for more introductory courses, but this is composition too. So if you don't want to do an outline, I'm not going to force you to do one. And you should know by this point whether or not that's going to be useful or a waste of time. So I have outline formats available to you on Desire to Learn if you want to take advantage of them, but you don't have to. Okay, that's my last bit. So unless you have any other questions for me, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for today.
Don't sign off yet. I want to talk to you.
Okay, well, I should say I'll stop the recording for today.
Do you have another class? I don't want to hold you up.
Nope, I'm free. We can discuss this after. We can discuss anything you want as soon as we're all finished. But anything else for the class that you want to ask before I just stop the recording?
No, I think I'll be all set.
Okay.
Yep, looking good.
Well, thanks for your time and attention again today. I will see you for session number 6 this Wednesday. And until then, take care.